Ahoy! Today's show was recorded live on Lady Elliot Island, so enjoy a few of the bird and beach sounds that you hear. Also, we talk a bit about turtle scoots. Scoots are just hard, bony plates, such as those found on a turtle's shell. Enjoy the show! G'day and welcome to the Sea Creatures podcast, a show all about the amazing animals that live beneath the waves. Each episode we talk about a specific sea creature with a guest who has spent time and interacted with this ocean animal. Our guests range from marine biologists to divers to underwater photographers, citizen scientists, and anyone with an intense passion for marine life. My name's Matt Testoni and I'm all of the above. And joining me for this episode of the Sea Creatures podcast is Liam Turner. And he's a marine ecologist working on Lady Elliot Island, which has got to be the dream. And it's exciting because we're recording from Lady Elliot Island today. So, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Matt.
So, today we're going to talk all about sea turtles. In particular, a few of the local species found around Australia, which Liam has worked with. So, first of all, though, tell us how you got to know or how you got to love sea turtles.
I grew up with a love of, I suppose, most animals, most life forms, I guess. I feel like by chance I've just fallen into working with them. I've had a few different positions where I've been lucky enough to work with these animals. So I guess I know a little bit more about turtles than I would some other things out in the ocean, yeah.
Where did you start? Where did your turtle journey start in terms of first experience?
My first experiences with them, I reckon... Probably when I was pretty young, a young kid, travelling out with my family up in far north Queensland. I've got relatives up there, and we went out a number of trips over the years to the Great Barrier Reef and just coastal waters, and getting to see them for the first time as a kid, under 10 years old. Where I'm from in Victoria, we don't get them, so I found them pretty interesting from that age, and fell in love with the sea as a kid. Did a marine biology degree, and one of my first gigs out of marine biology, out of my degree, was a marine conservation turtle rookery program that we were monitoring the rookeries out in Western Australia on Nalu Station in the southern part of Ningaloo Reef. So that's my first real working experience with them, yeah.
And so tell us, what sea turtles, because there are lots of different sea turtles.
Yeah, of course.
But what are your kind of areas and what ones are we going to talk about on this episode?
So the ones I've had the most to do with would be loggerhead turtles and green turtles. A little bit with flatbacks, but just a very small amount, and also hawksbills in terms of actually working with them. When I was over in Western Australia with the Nalu Sea Turtle Conservation Program, I was mostly part of a group who we surveyed the nesting rookeries of a particular area on Nalu Station, and that was a loggerhead rookery. So mostly loggers there. We had the odd green come up, a few sprinklings of greens, but yeah, it was big time loggerhead rookery, that one. I've had other jobs in the water where it's always surrounded by them.
Cool. So loggerheads, greens, flatbacks, which I've actually never heard of, so that's really cool as a turtle species that is kind of new to me, and I imagine quite a few people. But tell us a little bit about how you differentiate species of turtle.
There's quite a number of different ways. One of the biggest ones, I guess, flatbacks, for starters, they're endemic to Australia. Very dorso-ventrically compressed, so a flat shell, and it almost curves up on the sides, almost like a hat with their shell, and they have two big prefrontal scales between the eyes. That's one way to tell a flatback. With our loggerheads, they've got 2 pairs of prefrontal scales between the eyes, 5 pairs of intercostal scutes down the side of each side of the shell of the carapace, and they've got a massive head, really obvious when you see a big adult. Quite a light brown to almost yellow in colour. That's probably the biggest giveaways for the loggerhead. And the green turtles, they got just 1 pair of scales in between the eye, and then they got 4 pairs of scutes down either side of their carapace. Around Lady Elliot Island, most of the turtles we get here are juvenile green turtles. But the adults, you won't classify it as an adult until it's about 80 centimetres approximately. And bigger.
That's a big turtle.
Yeah, so that's big. So if you imagine that's just kind of the starting size for an adult, a mature adult, then they can get absolutely enormous, those animals, yeah.
Yeah, I remember recently I was snorkeling along and there was I'd seen a few little greens, and then I saw this massive turtle, and I was like, it has to be like a loggerhead or something like that. Yep. And a mate of mine was like, no, it's a green. It's just a proper adult. I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Once you've seen a few, the greens, they have quite a small head. Once you see a few loggers and greens, they are really easy to tell apart. But I suppose for anyone that hasn't seen them before, it can be a challenge unless you're really looking for those key features. Yeah.
Yeah.
One other one is if you ever see them close up, the greens have a claw on either flipper, just one claw on each flipper. Loggerheads have 2 pairs of claws, 2 pairs on each flipper. Hawksbills also have 2 pairs.
Yeah, I mean, for the loggerhead, I've been diving around Lady Elliot this week, and I've been like, okay, that turtle has no neck. It's a loggerhead turtle. Because I feel like they're quite chunky.
Yeah, a little bit. Yep. You almost can't see their neck. That's true.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step back too now and talk about what is a turtle. We'll start with it's a reptile, but tell us what is a turtle really? Because it's not a fish.
Absolutely not. No, it's an air-breathing marine reptile. They've been around for millions and millions of years. And yeah, they've over millions of years developed this shell, this carapace. It's basically their ribs of over millennia have basically fused into their carapace. So if you ever see a skeleton of a turtle, sea turtle, their ribs have essentially almost splayed out and fused together into this hard, round carapace.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you can kind of see how their evolution has gone. Obviously, once upon a time, they would have been, I don't know, looked relatively similar to lizards, I suppose, with no shell. But somewhere along the line, it became advantageous for them to get a bit of protection in the shell. Yeah.
Yeah, and being marine reptiles, it means they obviously have to breathe. And so
that's right. Yep.
That was one thing that caught me off guard the other day. I always knew turtles had to breathe, but there's quite a shallow lagoon here at Lady Elliot, and someone was, where do the turtles go? Can they survive in the shallow lagoon? I was like, they must exit. But someone like yourself was like, well, no, they just sit there. They can breathe air.
Yep.
And I was like, of course.
Yep. Yeah. If they get stranded, usually they'll go out with the tide, and they'll just sit off the back of the reef and wait for the tide to come in. Then they'll go back into the lagoon. Yeah, you do see the odd juvenile that sort of doesn't get out quick enough. They just wait around in the shallow pools for the tide to come in. It doesn't really faze them, it doesn't hurt them. As long as there's a bit of water, if they're out of the water for too long a period, obviously if they're sitting in the sun all day, they can get into a bit of trouble, get heat stroke, just like we can, get sunburnt. But yeah, they would just sit in the rock pools and just wait for the tide to come in. That's pretty common.
And so, what do turtles eat?
Yeah, it depends on the species. And also depends on the stage of life cycle as well. So juveniles are generally speaking, they're less fussy. So they can't afford to be strictly herbivores or strictly carnivores. They're usually omnivores. So that's including the green sea turtle. So greens are known to be herbivores as adults. That's predominantly what they'll eat. So seagrasses, marine algae, etc. And then when they're really young, they'll eat carrion. So fish, crustaceans, algae, whatever they can.
Are they scavenging the fish mainly, or I can't imagine a turtle just bites a fish, does it? Or
they're not very quick, and they don't tend to hunt like that. I've never seen any evidence of them doing that, but we do know that they can eat them if they get the chance. So when these turtles are really young, they float around in the open ocean before they come and settle on a reef system, and they'll be floating in amongst seaweed mats. Sargassum, the type of seaweed, is one of the more common species things. So the turtles will opportunistically feed on whatever they can get their mouth around, really. So our loggerheads, obviously when they're young, you kind of omnivores, they can't afford to be too fussy. As they get older, the adults basically carnivores. So they've got a really powerful beak. They've got a huge head for crushing hard shells and things. So crabs, mollusks in the sand, sea urchins. Some populations eat starfish and things.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can definitely learn a little bit about what a sea turtle eats by just looking at its beak.
Yeah.
So hawksbills, for example, have a hawk beak. That's the best way to describe it. And it's like they're very good at picking just small little sessile animals off the reef. So things like soft corals, sponges. I've seen them scraping living tissue off hard corals. All sorts of things like that. They'll nibble on algae as well when they can. They're considered omnivores generally, and when they're adults as well. Yeah. So it just depends on the species. Yeah, absolutely.
And so they're floating around, kind of eating. Some things are eating, herbivores. Some are eating other things. But what is just going to wait for the plane to go past? Because that's the only way onto the island, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us about a day in the life of a sea turtle.
Well, I've never followed a turtle around for a whole day, but I can tell you that the greens, they seem to be a lot more active during the daytime. For around Lady Elliot Island, the loggerheads seem to be pretty well stationary. I haven't seen them feeding at day, so I'd be willing to bet that at night time they might go out to the sort of sandy bottom, sea floor, and forage a bit more, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But the greens, they feed during the day pretty regularly, yeah. And at night time they tend to do not a whole lot. They quite often have their favourite resting stations or beds, for lack of a better term.
I see. It's like a little burrow amongst the coral.
Yeah. Some areas are so worn by turtles sleeping there that it's almost like a bowl that they'll sleep in. And occasionally they might even fight over their spots. I've seen them numerous times where you have one sleeping in a spot and then another one will come and barge it out of the way and take the spot off it. So, they're a little bit of competition, I suppose, there. I see them as generally solitary, but they just seem to gravitate to where there's food, etc. So that's why you see lots of them in one area, particularly the greens. Whereas loggerheads, you might have noticed over the years, they're much more spaced out. You don't tend to see them in groups anywhere near
Never together.
The same amount. Yeah, very rare, hey. And I think that's a big partly to do with what they eat, because they're carnivores, their food's much more dispersed, spread out. You don't have a giant seafloor covered in mollusk or crustacean where all the loggerheads are congregating. Maybe that happens somewhere, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, so they've got to go and they've got to kind of search for their food more. So I suppose you don't want to be...
That's it.
Yeah, whereas seagrass beds with green turtles, it's just like, everyone come in, it's a buffet.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah, that's the way I see it. What else they do, they spend a lot of time at cleaning stations, getting clean. So very regularly to see a turtle sitting mid-water column, completely hunched over, head down, flippers right down like they're completely relaxed. It's pretty cool to see. And then all the little reef fish, little surgeon fish and butterfly fish and whatever else is around, picking the algae and bits of dead skin off the body and just keeping them nice and healthy. Like a lot of species, it keeps their health right up. Because if these animals don't clean them up a bit, they'll get all sorts of things growing on them. Ectoparasites, I suppose you might call them. They're not all parasitic, obviously. Things like barnacles and all that. Those fish will be eating the tiny little barnacle larvae that are trying to settle on the carapaces, for sure.
Yeah, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's the same as a boat. If a boat gets a lot of growth on it, it really slows in the water. So if a turtle had a lot of barnacles, it would be quite a lot more drag, wouldn't it?
Affects it to a certain degree, yeah. It's obviously wouldn't be an acute issue, but yeah, over time it probably might wear on the animal for sure.
Yeah, and I've heard of other parasites that can get into the brain of different sea creatures and stuff as well, I guess. Yeah,
they get all sorts of parasites, a whole bunch of different types of worms and different types of flukes that will get into the brain. And the healthy animals will carry parasites, but it's not until they get sick, their immune system gets suppressed, I should say, that the parasites start to take over after they're already immunosuppressed. So it's a kind of an interesting balance. Yeah.
So they'll go and hang at that cleaning station to kind of get that fixed.
Well, not so much about the internal parasites. I don't think that does a whole lot. It's more the external ones. Yeah, for sure. The internal ones, I think a lot of it just comes down to the animal's overall health. And if it's healthy and it's getting well fed and it's not exposed to too many environmental, pollutants, toxins these days perhaps, then it's probably going to be more resilient in keeping those parasites at bay. Whereas if it starts to get sick and maybe gets impacted by some toxins, which there's populations that are starting to show pretty high levels of different heavy metals and petrochemicals in their systems, that they start to get higher parasitic counts in their bodies, etc.
Tell us a bit about what are threats to sea turtles.
Me and my lovely wife run a sea turtle rehab facility up in Gladstone, and so I learnt a lot about that sort of thing in that job. And we mostly dealt with green turtles, and this is where I've had most of my experience with flatbacks. But we mostly had greens. The most common issue we had was floating disease. It seems to be an issue where they get big gas build-up in the intestines, and it stops them being able to regulate their buoyancy, and so they can't dive down if it gets bad enough. So we think it's to do with some sort of infection. As a result of the floating disease, boat strike becomes a really major issue, especially in some of the coastal high traffic areas, recreational boats, etc. So we had a number of boat strikes there. Obviously a no-brainer, a hull into a turtle or a prop. It doesn't end well, and it's pretty sad. Made us feel pretty angry, and it's heartbreaking seeing these beautiful animals, because they have such an amazing will to live and to try and survive. You'll see an animal with its completely opened up, with its lungs. Quite often their lungs are along the top of their their carapace on the inside, obviously. So punctured lungs were a big one. If any animals we had punctured lungs, they got euthanized, and there's not much we could do about that.
Yeah.
But there's animals where you had, the sides opened up, and we had some good stories where we were able to release them, and some not so good stories where we couldn't help. That was a really frustrating one, because that's preventable. The biggest thing for that one is, for recreational boaters out there, it's just to be vigilant out on the water. Know the area you're in. Know if you're in a turtle feeding ground, and if there's high density of marine turtles in a particular area because of seagrass grounds, similar for dugongs as well, I suppose. And if you know you're in those areas, be more vigilant. Have a look out at the bow of the boat when you're cruising along on your tinny. Slow down. A couple of really simple things that really help. I've spent a fair bit of time out in the water, and I wouldn't lie, I've come close to having collisions with turtles before, but thankfully I've never hit one. But the reason I feel like I've come close is because I've always been very paranoid about having someone at the front of the boat. Yeah. Like spotting and pointing out if there's a turtle, we'd shout out, which is always, I've found really helpful for sure.
Yeah, and just so if you did happen to be a boatie and you've hit a turtle, what would you do, or what would the best course of action be? If you hit it and you can see it's injured on the surface.
Yeah, so it's pretty tricky, because even though it may be injured, it doesn't mean they're going to be easy to retrieve or investigate. They are very strong animals, and they can still get away and overpower someone if they want to, especially an adult. And if you've got an adult and you've got a boat with 2 people, you're not going to be able to pull the animal into your boat. They weigh well over 100 kilos, lots of them. If it's juvenile and you can safely retrieve the animal, call up Parks and Wildlife Service. They'll be able to get you in touch with rehabilitation facilities that you could potentially get the animal to, or they'll be able to sort out logistics on getting the animal. There's a bunch of them up and down the coast. So you got Coin Island, you've got where we were, you've got Australia Zoo, you've got there's some small ones. There's one in Airlie Beach in the Whitsundays. I'm aware of one in Mission Beach. There's this very small little carer there. There's one in Fitzroy Island in Cairns, very capably run.
So I guess the good thing to note though is that also, if you do get an injured turtle, it's not like you're going to get in trouble. It's
if you're trying to help the animal, and you've got the animal's welfare at heart, then you're not going to get in trouble. You just need to call the authorities. That's the most important thing. And obviously get that animal out of danger. If you can get it in the boat safely, because we don't want people to break their backs. Yeah. And you can actually do the animal more harm than good trying to get it into the boat if you don't have the right manpower. It has happened in the past where people have tried to lift a turtle into the boat and have done it incorrectly and damaged the shoulders around the flippers because they haven't known. Yeah, absolutely. And quite often they'll beat themselves after they've been injured. Okay. Not always, but they do. It does happen. And then, obviously, it gets a little bit easy because then you could potentially
get them up and get them to a rehab.
Yeah, you could have groups. If you've got a few people, you could organise to transport the animal. We always found a great way to transport a large turtle on a beach was, get 4 or 5 people around it, lift it onto a tarp, and then move it on the tarp. Try and get it out of the sun, particularly in summer, like a cool towel over it.
Yeah.
I've always found that putting just a towel, not a wet towel, just a towel over the eyes calms them down a little bit, reduces stress, that sort of thing. In winter, you might have the opposite issue where it's quite cool, quite cold, and you don't want the animal to get too cold because they can get hypothermia. So if you put a wet towel over a turtle and it's 15 degrees or less external outside temperature, then
just like a human, they're going to get
you might cause it more stress than more harm than good as well. So it's thinking about those sorts of things because they're a reptile, ectotherm. They don't produce their own body heat.
So they rely on the environment for
their
heat.
Yeah. That's always a big one that we were.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, let's go to a up note. Tell us your favourite turtle story or the best encounter you've had with a turtle.
I've had some amazing wild encounters. Honestly, my time at the rehab facility, I found it pretty profound. You start to get to know individuals there. That's one thing that really stunned me about working with them this closely. Day to day, you see them when they first come in the horrible state they quite often were in, and you see them regain their health, in the good cases. Yeah. And then you see these animals, the healthier they get, their character starts to come out, and they all have different personalities. Some of them are quite happy to have come straight up to you on the side of the swimming pool and want to scratch, and they want you to scratch their shell. They don't have any cleaner fish in the swimming pool, in the rehab facility, so I suppose they saw us as the next best thing. So they come up to us, you give them a scratch, and it'd feel good. You could tell they liked it. They come to it all the time. You'd have other ones that didn't really like it. They didn't want it too much at all. You'd have ones that would be aggressive and they'd kind of bite the other turtles at feeding time, and and then other ones that were quite timid. So I don't know, learning how different their personalities were, all within the same species, greens for the most part that we had. That was pretty fascinating, I thought. Some of those individuals we rehabilitated and released, you've made a difference in an animal's life, particularly the adults. When you rehab the adults that are viable breeding females, we didn't deal with any adult males while we were there. That's an amazing feeling when you see them walk out the beach that last time. Well, yeah, I don't know how big the impact is, but it's just incredibly rewarding being able to give that animal a second chance.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what keeps you going in that, because there's a lot of dark stuff in that sort of field.
It'd be pretty tough, I imagine.
But those good days where you get to release the animals, or when you get to see the progression of an animal, is pretty awesome. Yeah, I really, really like that part of it.
Yeah, the personalities thing is awesome. Like, I know swimming along the reef, try and take photos of them. Some of them will just pose for you. They just come in right in, they're just friendly, and then others, they kind of tilt their shell towards you in a bit of a defensive stance, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm not going to get a photo of this one. I'll leave this one alone. I'll go find one that wants my company. Yep,
they're all a little bit different. Yeah, and I suppose that's like anything, really. Like, and you'll probably find that with almost any living animal, anyone that's kind of spent any length of time with a particular species would probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, they've all got their own personalities.
I've heard with spiders, actually. Like, spiders have personalities.
Who would think, And you're not going to know that unless you spend a lot of time with spiders.
Yeah. Well, I've had 2 cool turtle encounters when I've been on the island lately. Yep. One was just watching, I was telling you earlier, a flute fish. Hovering, which is, if anyone doesn't know, it's a long cylindrical kind of fish. At first I thought it was a sea snake. It wasn't. But it was hovering over this turtle and just following this turtle, like, in perfect unison. The turtle would turn, so would the flute fish. And then the turtle went under some coral, and the flute fish just waited. Yeah. Went on top. It was amazing. And the second one was, I pretended to be a turtle the other day. So I swam over a turtle cleaning station, and I just kind of lowered my fins and my arms. And then the cleaneress came out and started to clean me. Yeah. And I was like, I'm a turtle.
It's cool, eh?
Yeah.
That's really cool. Did you pick any scabs off?
I think,
you got any wounds on you at the moment, mate?
I've got a few wounds from the fins I've been using recently. I need some fin socks. But so I was like, getting my wounds cleaned up.
Yeah, that's it. That's awesome. The flute mouth, like, the only thing I could think of that it's doing is just trying to opportunistically hunt. You do see it happen with a lot of different species where they kind of hunt in pairs in a way. Opposites, like gropers, octopus, gropers and certain types of fish, coral trout, etc. will do it. But I do wonder whether it was hoping that the turtle would flush something out, and then it pounces once the turtle does that while it's foraging,
Yeah, and it was hiding directly above, so it would kind of be invisible from below.
Yeah. We would be kind of curious to know that.
Well, just before we wrap up, have you got any cool facts about sea turtles?
I was pretty blown away. The first time I found out during turtle mating season that the females will store sperm from particular males and keep it for a later date inside their bodies. And it's generally a more favourable male that you do that with. I never knew that turtles did that. They'll keep it for like a duration of a nesting season. Not 100% sure if it's through even periods of years. I don't know about that.
Oh wow, like a living sperm bank. Is it just the one male that they collect, or do they mate with other males during that time? So they kind of
mate with other males, but I think I don't know how, but they somehow preference a certain individual for whatever reason. They mate once at the start of the year or a few times, and then they're good laying their clutches of eggs through the rest of the season, fertilising as they go, I suppose.
Wow.
Yeah, which is pretty fascinating to me. I thought that was a pretty interesting fact.
Yeah, and just to extrapolate on that, tell us a little bit about how do turtles mate? Like, is there not a procedure, but
certainly is a procedure. Males have a pretty surprisingly long penis, and the males have a really long tail. That's the easiest way to tell the adults apart. Juveniles pretty much can't tell them apart if you're just looking at them. Very hard. But the male's long tail, and the males generally have bigger claws on the front of their flippers.
Yeah.
So they'll all congregate at the start of the nesting season, depending on where you are in the world. October, November, this part of the world. And all the males and females will migrate in, and the males will start basically competing for the females, and they'll be clambering to try and jump on the females and mate with them. And basically their big hooks on their flippers help them sort of hook it over the front of the female shell so they can get a good hold.
Is that the only function of the hooks, do you think?
That's the main function, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you next time you're out in the water and you see a big male loggerhead or green out there, check out the hooks. You will notice they're a lot bigger than the females, unless they've been snapped off for whatever reason, which occasionally I have noticed. But yeah, they'll hook on, and so they'll, for lack of a better term, have a bit of a turtle orgy at the start of the year, and then the males kind of move off and go back to their foraging grounds, and the females will hang around or head to their rookery, their nesting beaches, and then they'll spend the summer there laying clutches of eggs. Depending on the species, determines how much they're going to lay. I think it's anywhere from 2 to 6 clutches of eggs generally, and every few weeks too.
Ah, cool. And so I guess the final fact, just going on from the eggs, is how turtles decide which sex they're going to be inside the shell. Tell us a little bit about that fact, 'cause that's cool.
So it's totally determined by temperature. So like most reptiles, as far as I'm aware, temperature is the main factor that determines sex. So the rule is hot chicks, cool dudes. So I think around 29 degrees, something like that, is around kind of 50-50-ish. But it's usually not 50-50. It's usually, I believe it's skewed, naturally usually skewed more towards the females. But depending on where the turtles nest will determine temperature of the nest. So if there's, I don't know, we don't have it in Australia, but some parts of the world there's black sand. That sand will get hotter, so you'd think maybe there's more likely to be more females in those nests potentially. Could be a factor. The amount of shade on a nesting rookery. So our turtles here quite often will nest under the octopus bushes, so they get quite a lot of shade. Some beaches have almost no shade and they're totally in the sun. So those things will help determine the sex ratio. And there is obviously limits. Once it gets too cold or too hot, either end of the spectrum, then you start to get embryos dying and they can't develop anymore. So quite a few parts of the world now we're starting to see, well, I know there's plenty of research being done in Australia where we're seeing the percentage of females versus males is so much skewed towards females now that it's causing a fair bit of concern. It's upwards in some areas, from memory, it's close to like 97 or more percent females in some nesting rookeries.
Yeah.
It's not like that everywhere. They're starting to think that's all due to climate change. It is a bit of a concern, and obviously we wouldn't see the effects on populations, years down the track. Sea turtles don't mature till about 30 years, so you have to wait decades to see if you start getting those skewed ratios.
So in 30 years'
into
time,
the adult
we might
populations, So
have an issue.
So if it was to be as bad as it might be, you wouldn't see a population crash or a total skewing for another few decades yet.
I know there's a lot of cool research being done with like shading the eggs and different things as well at the moment. So there is hope, but fingers crossed for the future. Yeah,
I know, and I think there's all sorts of people asking all sorts of questions about that sort of thing. And it's like, some of the other questions are the turtles maybe going to slightly move their rookery where they're nesting, and nest further south or something. I'm not too sure if they are, I don't know, but I know the questions have been asked like that. But yeah, it is definitely concerning if that's a trend. But there's also places where they're nesting and there's not too much of an issue because there's lots of shade, which is a good thing. So I don't know, I don't think it's like a thing that's happening absolutely everywhere, but it's definitely happening in some of the rookeries. And it seems like, I think one of the bigger rookeries up in far north Queensland, the biggest green turtle rookery up in Crane Island, that's one of the issues they're having there. And also inundation. Yeah. So the nests are getting flooded from underneath from the high tides. Yeah. It seems like, so they've had to build it up with sand in the off season and do all sorts of things. It's a pretty cool place, Crane Island. Like as you said, they move the sand over and they shade the eggs and no one's allowed there unless you are like in parks or a top scientist. Not even Attenborough was allowed there. Even turned in the cold child out. Amazing. Yeah. And just before we go, if anyone wants to see turtles, and especially Lady Elliot Island, or come and hear some of the awesome education that you do, tell us a little bit about Lady Elliot and how you get here and what you would do, and what season you would come for turtles. Season is in summer, so between November through to suppose March is the nesting season, April, but generally November, March. And if you want to get here, you got to get here by plane. Fly out of Harvey Bay, you can fly out of Gold Coast, Brisbane, Bundaberg, but Harvey Bay is probably the main way to fly out here. And yeah, I work out here with the activities crew. We have some very capable marine ecologists and biologists trying to, inspire and educate everybody about this amazing ecosystem we have around here. So if you feel inclined to come, please pay us a visit, say g'day, and yeah,
Lady Elliot Island on the Great Barrier Reef. Well, it's been a pleasure.
No worries, Matt. It's my pleasure, and I hope you learned a little bit about turtles.
Yeah, definitely learned a lot. That's and I hope everyone listening has.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Sea Creatures Podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by myself, Matt Testoni. Production assistance by George McGrath, and music by the talented Dan Musil. You can see my photography on Instagram, Matt_Testoni_photography, on my webpage, underwatermedia.com. If you'd like the show, please jump onto our Patreon account and show your support there. Coming up on the next episode of the Sea Creatures Podcast, we're going to be talking all about shellfish and shellfish reefs. This has been the Sea Creatures Podcast. Over and out.